Dr. Vincent Hayes stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker to life as evening descended. At 42, he had achieved everything society measured as success. His cardiology practice served the wealthiest families in the city, his investment portfolio included 3 luxury apartment buildings, and his name appeared regularly in medical journals. Yet standing alone in his office, surrounded by mahogany furniture and certificates of achievement, Vincent felt the weight of something missing. His colleagues envied his lifestyle. His patients trusted his expertise without question. His financial advisors congratulated him on wise investments that continued generating wealth even while he slept. But none of this filled the quiet moments when Vincent returned to his empty penthouse and realized he had no one to share his day with, no one who cared about the person behind the professional accomplishments. Vincent had built walls around himself over the years. Early in his career, he had learned that wealth attracted attention but rarely genuine affection. Women approached him at charity galas and medical conferences, their interest clearly focused on his bank account rather than his character. After several disappointing relationships that felt more like business arrangements than emotional connections, Vincent had retreated into work and solitude. The arrival. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Vincent received a call from his property manager about a new tenant for the garden apartment in his Brighton Street building. He rarely involved himself in tenant matters, preferring to keep his investments at arm's length. But something made him glance at the application sitting on his desk. Sophie Bennett, 26, graduate student in architecture, references excellent, income modest but stable through a university assistantship. The photograph showed a young woman with kind eyes and an unpretentious smile that seemed to radiate warmth even through the paper. Vincent approved the application without much thought and returned to his surgical schedule. He had 3 procedures that week, all complex cases requiring his complete focus. Yet during a rare quiet moment between surgeries, he found himself thinking about the new tenant. Something about her application had felt different from the usual parade of young professionals seeking trendy urban housing. 3 days later, Vincent stopped by the Brighton Street property to inspect some renovation work in the lobby. The building was one of his favorites, a restored historic structure with original hardwood floors and architectural details that spoke of craftsmanship from another era. As he discussed tile choices with the contractor, a battered blue sedan pulled into the visitor parking. The car looked like it had survived several hard winters, with a dent in the rear bumper and paint faded by sun and time. A young woman emerged, wrestling with boxes that seemed determined to escape her arms. Her dark hair fell across her face as she balanced 3 containers stacked precariously high. She wore simple jeans and a university sweatshirt, and even from a distance, Vincent could see her determined expression as she refused to make multiple trips. Vincent found himself moving before thinking, crossing the parking lot with quick strides. He reached her just as the top box began sliding sideways, catching it smoothly before it could tumble to the ground. The woman looked up, startled, and Vincent recognized Sophie from her application photo. In person, she radiated a warmth the photograph had only hinted at. Her eyes were green with flecks of gold, and when she smiled in relief, something in Vincent's carefully controlled world shifted in a way he could not quite name. First impressions. "Thank you so much," Sophie said, adjusting her grip on the remaining boxes. "I thought I could carry everything in one trip, but my ambition clearly exceeded my arm strength." Vincent smiled, something he realized he did not often enough. "Let me help." "Which apartment?" "Garden level, Unit 3. I just signed the lease yesterday." "I'm Sophie Bennett." "Vincent Hayes. I own the building." Sophie's eyes widened slightly, but not with the calculating interest Vincent had learned to expect when people discovered his wealth. Instead, she looked almost embarrassed. "Oh. Well, thank you for approving my application. The location is perfect for the university, and the rent is actually reasonable for this neighborhood. I was worried I would not find anything affordable." As they carried boxes inside, Vincent noticed details that painted a picture of Sophie's character. Her belongings were few but carefully chosen. Books on architectural history, their spines worn from repeated reading. A worn guitar case covered in travel stickers from national parks. A small collection of potted herbs wrapped protectively in newspaper, each one labeled with handwritten tags. No expensive electronics, no designer labels, just the essentials of a life focused on purpose rather than appearance. The garden apartment opened onto a small private courtyard filled with overgrown roses and a stone bench beneath an old oak tree. The space had been neglected for years, and Vincent had considered hiring landscapers to restore it. But Sophie set down her box and gazed at the outdoor space with undisguised delight, her face lighting up in a way that transformed her features. "This is beautiful," she whispered, stepping onto the moss-covered stones. "I was hoping I could plant some vegetables here if that's allowed. I grew up helping my grandmother in her garden. She taught me that growing your own food connects you to the earth in ways that shopping never can." Vincent, who typically maintained strict professional boundaries with tenants, found himself saying, "Of course. In fact, the courtyard needs someone who will care for it. The previous tenant never used it. Do whatever you like with the space." Unexpected conversations. Over the next hour, Vincent found reasons to stay. He helped arrange furniture, explaining that the antique dresser would fit better against the north wall where sunlight would not fade the wood. He demonstrated the temperamental heating system that required a specific sequence of valve adjustments. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge with tools from his car, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who found satisfaction in small repairs. Sophie made tea in mismatched mugs, apologizing for not having proper cups yet. They sat in the courtyard as dusk gathered around them, the air cooling and carrying the scent of the overgrown roses. Sophie spoke about her studies, her dream of designing affordable housing that felt like homes rather than warehouses. She described her childhood in a small rural town where her father had been a carpenter and her mother a school teacher. Both had passed away in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving Sophie with grief, student loans, and a determination to honor their values through her work. "My father believed that good design should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy," Sophie said, cradling her mug. "He built houses that working families could afford, but he put the same care into them that architects reserve for mansions. Every joint fitted perfectly. Every window placed to capture light. He taught me that quality and affordability are not opposites." Vincent listened with an attention he usually reserved for patient consultations. He asked questions and heard answers that revealed a person of substance and integrity. Sophie did not ask about his wealth or status. She did not flatter or position herself for advantage. She simply talked to him as one human being to another, and Vincent realized how rare that had become in his life. He found himself sharing things he rarely discussed. The pressure of being born into a medical family where success was expected rather than celebrated. The loneliness of watching colleagues build families while he remained alone. The satisfaction of saving lives balanced against the burden of the ones he could not save. "People think wealth solves everything," Vincent said quietly. "But money cannot buy the things that actually matter. Connection. Purpose. The feeling that someone sees you rather than what you represent." Sophie nodded, her expression thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say that the richest person is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most reasons to be grateful. She lived in a tiny house and grew her own food, but she was happier than anyone I have ever known." The beginning of something unnamed. As Vincent finally prepared to leave, the courtyard now fully dark except for the glow from Sophie's apartment windows, Sophie walked him to the gate. The iron scrollwork needed paint, Vincent noticed, adding it mentally to his maintenance list. "Thank you again for your help today," she said, her voice warm. "You did not have to spend your evening hauling boxes for a tenant. I am sure you have better things to do." Vincent looked at her in the dim light of the garden lanterns, noticing the way shadows played across her features. "I wanted to," he said simply, surprised by how true it was. Something passed between them, a recognition neither was ready to name. Vincent felt it like a current in the air, a possibility that both attracted and unsettled him. Sophie held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then smiled and stepped back. "Well, good night, Dr. Hayes." "Vincent, please." "And good night, Sophie." Vincent walked back to his car feeling oddly unsettled. He had built his life on control, on careful decisions and measured responses. Every aspect of his existence followed patterns he had established over decades. But something about Sophie's genuine warmth and unguarded kindness had slipped past his defenses like water finding cracks in stone. That night, unable to sleep, Vincent stood at his penthouse window looking toward the neighborhood where his Brighton Street building stood. He thought about Sophie arranging her small collection of books, planning a vegetable garden, living a life rich in purpose despite limited means. He thought about the distance between their worlds and the unexpected pull he felt toward her honesty. Vincent had dated before, relationships that followed predictable patterns with women from his social circle. Dinner at expensive restaurants. Conversations about mutual acquaintances and investment strategies. Physical intimacy that felt more mechanical than passionate. But those connections had felt like transactions, partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than genuine feeling. What he sensed with Sophie was different, dangerous in its simplicity. A decision made. As the city quieted around him, Vincent made a decision that surprised himself. Tomorrow, he would return to the building to check on the courtyard irrigation system. It was a reasonable landlord concern, something that needed attention before winter arrived. That it would give him a reason to see Sophie again was merely coincidental. Or so he told himself as sleep finally came, bringing dreams of green eyes and herb gardens and conversations that felt like coming home to a place he had never been. The next morning, Vincent found himself distracted during his hospital rounds. He gave instructions to his surgical team with his usual precision, but part of his mind wandered to that courtyard and the woman who saw beauty in neglected roses. His head nurse, a perceptive woman who had worked with him for 15 years, noticed his preoccupation. "You seem different today, Dr. Hayes," she observed while they reviewed patient charts. "Something good happen?" Vincent considered the question. Had something good happened? He had simply helped a tenant move boxes. Yet somehow, that simple act had shifted something fundamental in his carefully ordered world. "Maybe," he said, allowing himself a small smile. "We will see." Chance encounters. The following weeks brought an unexpected rhythm to Vincent's life. He found himself visiting the Brighton Street building more frequently than any property manager would consider necessary. A loose railing here, a flickering hallway light there, small maintenance issues that suddenly demanded his personal attention. Each visit seemed to coincide with moments when Sophie would be tending her courtyard garden or returning from classes with her arms full of architectural drawings. Their conversations began casually, brief exchanges about the weather or building repairs. But gradually, they deepened into something more substantial. Sophie would invite him to see the progress in her garden, where she had planted late-season vegetables and begun trimming back the wild roses to reveal their original beauty. Vincent would linger, asking questions about her design projects, genuinely interested in her vision for creating affordable housing that honored human dignity. One afternoon in late October, Vincent arrived to find Sophie kneeling in the dirt, her hands covered in soil as she planted spring bulbs. The autumn sun cast golden light across the courtyard, and for a moment, Vincent simply watched her work. There was something meditative about her movements, a care and intentionality that spoke of deeper values. "Tulips," Sophie said without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. "My grandmother always said that planting bulbs in autumn is an act of faith. You bury them in the cold earth, trusting that spring will come and bring them to life." Vincent settled onto the stone bench, content to watch her work. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was everything good in my childhood," Sophie replied, sitting back on her heels. "When my parents died, I wanted to quit school and disappear. But I kept hearing her voice telling me that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully. So here I am, covered in dirt and planning a future." The vulnerability in her words touched something in Vincent. He recognized the shape of her grief because he carried his own. "I lost my father 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. He had just retired, had all these plans for traveling with my mother. I was supposed to save lives, and I could not save his." Sophie looked at him with understanding that needed no words. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and sat beside him on the bench. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Vincent felt the warmth of her presence like a physical thing. "Medicine must be a heavy burden," Sophie said softly. "All those lives depending on your skill. All that responsibility." "Sometimes," Vincent admitted. "But it also gives purpose. Every patient who walks out of my hospital is a reason to continue. Every family I can keep intact justifies the years of training and sacrifice." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light shifted through the oak leaves. Vincent realized he had not felt this peaceful in years, sitting in a modest courtyard with dirt under his fingernails from helping Sophie plant bulbs, talking about loss and purpose with a woman who asked nothing from him except honest conversation. Financial struggles. As November arrived with its cold winds and early darkness, Vincent began noticing signs of strain in Sophie's life. She mentioned picking up extra tutoring jobs to supplement her assistantship. Her ancient car broke down twice in 1 week, and Vincent watched from his office window as she waited for the bus in the rain, her thin jacket clearly inadequate against the weather. One evening, Vincent stopped by with takeout from a nearby restaurant, claiming he had accidentally ordered too much food. Sophie accepted with grateful exhaustion, and they ate together in her small apartment. Vincent noticed the thermostat set low to save on heating bills, the stack of past due notices partially hidden under textbooks, the shadows under Sophie's eyes from too many late nights working multiple jobs. "How are your classes going?" Vincent asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Sophie smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "They are good. Challenging but good. I am working on a thesis project about adaptive reuse of abandoned buildings for community housing. Turning empty warehouses and forgotten structures into homes people can afford." "That sounds ambitious." "It is probably too ambitious," Sophie admitted, her shoulders sagging. "The research alone requires resources I do not have. I need to visit sites, interview residents, analyze construction costs. My advisor says I should scale back the scope, but this project matters. These are real problems that need real solutions." Vincent listened, his mind already calculating possibilities. He had resources. He had connections. He could solve Sophie's financial problems with a single phone call, could fund her research project completely and barely notice the expense. But something held him back, an awareness that inserting his wealth into her life would change the fundamental nature of their connection. A medical emergency. The following week brought an event that shifted everything. Vincent was at the hospital completing rounds when his phone rang. Sophie's name appeared on the screen, and when he answered, her voice was tight with controlled panic. "Vincent, I am sorry to bother you, but I do not know what else to do. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, collapsed in the hallway. She is conscious but confused, and she keeps saying her chest feels tight. The ambulance is coming, but I thought maybe you could help." Vincent was already moving toward the exit. "I am 10 minutes away. Keep her calm and still. Do not let her exert herself. I will be right there." He drove faster than was strictly legal, his mind running through diagnostic possibilities. When he arrived at the building, he found Sophie kneeling beside an elderly woman in the second-floor hallway, holding her hand and speaking in soothing tones. Mrs. Chen looked pale and frightened, but Sophie's presence seemed to be keeping her grounded. Vincent knelt beside them, his professional calm taking over. He checked Mrs. Chen's pulse, noted her symptoms, asked targeted questions about her medical history. The ambulance arrived moments later, but Vincent accompanied Mrs. Chen to the hospital, ensuring she received immediate attention from the cardiac unit. The diagnosis was angina, serious but treatable. Mrs. Chen would need medication and lifestyle changes, but she would recover. Vincent stayed at the hospital until she was stable and her daughter arrived from across town, tearful and grateful. When Vincent finally returned to the Brighton Street building near midnight, he found Sophie still awake, sitting in the courtyard despite the cold. She had wrapped herself in a blanket and was staring at the dark sky. "Is she okay?" Sophie asked immediately. "She will be fine," Vincent assured her, sitting beside her. "You did exactly the right thing, staying calm and calling for help quickly. You might have saved her life." Sophie exhaled shakily, and Vincent realized she had been holding her fear tightly controlled until now. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Mrs. Chen reminds me of my grandmother. When I saw her fall, I just kept thinking about losing someone else I care about." Without thinking, Vincent wrapped an arm around Sophie's shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into him, and they sat together in the darkness, finding comfort in shared warmth and the simple fact of not being alone. Walls coming down. After that night, something shifted between them. The walls Vincent had carefully maintained began crumbling. He stopped pretending his visits to the building were about maintenance. Sophie stopped pretending she did not watch for his car from her window. Their relationship moved into territory that was clearly more than landlord and tenant, though neither spoke the words that would name it something else. They began having dinner together regularly. Sometimes Vincent cooked in his penthouse, elaborate meals that showcased skills he rarely used. Sometimes Sophie prepared simple dishes in her tiny kitchen, teaching him her grandmother's recipes for soup and bread. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared tastes in music and books, debating philosophy and politics, laughing at each other's terrible jokes. Vincent introduced Sophie to his world carefully, taking her to a charity gala where she wore a borrowed dress and charmed his colleagues with her genuine interest in their work. Sophie showed Vincent her world too, inviting him to student presentations where passionate young architects argued about social responsibility and environmental sustainability. But beneath the growing intimacy, Vincent wrestled with an impossible dilemma. He was falling in love with Sophie, had probably been falling since the day she arrived with her boxes and her dreams. Yet the distance between their circumstances felt insurmountable. He had wealth that could solve all her problems. She had pride that would resist his help. The power imbalance inherent in their situation created an ethical maze with no clear path. A desperate plan. In early December, Sophie confided that she might have to withdraw from school. Her tuition payment for the spring semester was due, and despite working every available hour, she was still $8,000 short. Student loans had limits. Scholarships had dried up. Her only option seemed to be taking a semester off to work full-time, though her advisor warned that interrupted graduate programs often became abandoned ones. Vincent listened to her explain this with forced optimism, watched her try to frame potential failure as merely a postponement, and felt something break inside him. That night, he made calls to his financial advisors and lawyers. He established the Harrison Educational Foundation, a charitable trust designed to provide emergency funding for graduate students facing financial hardship. He ensured the foundation's operations were completely anonymous, with selection criteria that Sophie clearly met but that could plausibly apply to other students as well. The payment was processed through official university channels. No connection to Vincent Hayes appeared anywhere in the paperwork. It was, he told himself, simply using his resources to prevent a talented student from abandoning her dreams. It had nothing to do with his feelings for Sophie. It was an ethical act of philanthropy, not a manipulation. He almost believed his own justifications. Deepening love. Christmas approached, and with it came a softness to their relationship that felt like inevitability. Sophie decorated her apartment with handmade ornaments and a small tree from the farmer's market. Vincent brought wine and helped her string lights, their hands brushing with increasing frequency, neither pulling away. On Christmas Eve, they sat together in the courtyard despite the cold, bundled in blankets and drinking hot chocolate Sophie had made from her grandmother's recipe. The city sound seemed distant, muffled by winter air, and the courtyard felt like a world apart. "Thank you," Sophie said suddenly. "For this year. For being someone I can trust. For seeing me as more than just a struggling student or a charity case." Vincent's chest tightened with guilt and longing. "Sophie, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Sophie turned to him, her eyes reflecting the strand of Christmas lights overhead. "I am falling in love with you, Vincent. I know the timing is complicated and our situations are different, but I need you to know. You have made this difficult year beautiful." Vincent looked at her, this extraordinary woman who had transformed his carefully controlled life into something messy and real and infinitely precious. He knew he should confess about the tuition payment. He knew honesty demanded it. Instead, he kissed her, pouring all his complicated feelings into that contact, and Sophie kissed him back with a passion that felt like coming home. They held each other in the cold courtyard, neither speaking the truths that needed speaking, both choosing the sweetness of the moment over the complications of reality. Above them, stars wheeled through winter darkness, indifferent to human choices and the prices they would eventually demand, the discovery. January arrived with bitter cold and the start of spring semester. Sophie sat in the university financial aid office, staring at the computer screen with confusion clouding her features. The administrator, Mrs. Patterson, wore a patient smile as she refreshed the page for the third time. "I don't understand," Sophie said slowly, her voice uncertain. "My tuition balance shows 0. But I still owe $8,000 for this semester. There must be an error in the system." Mrs. Patterson clicked through several screens, her expression shifting from routine helpfulness to genuine puzzlement. "According to our records, an anonymous benefactor paid your outstanding balance 3 weeks ago. The payment came through the Harrison Educational Foundation. It's a private charitable trust that provides emergency funding for graduate students." Sophie's heart began racing, a cold sensation spreading through her chest. She had applied to dozens of scholarships and grants over the past year, tracking every application with meticulous care. She knew every foundation she had contacted, and Harrison Educational was not among them. "Can you tell me who made the donation? There has to be some mistake. I never applied for this." "The foundation protects donor privacy quite strictly," Mrs. Patterson explained, adjusting her glasses. "But the payment is completely legitimate and specifically designated for your account. Someone wanted to help you complete your degree, Miss Bennett. You should consider yourself very fortunate." Sophie left the office in a daze, her mind spinning through possibilities. She had no wealthy relatives who might have intervened. No secret admirers with that kind of money. Her few close friends were all students facing their own financial struggles. As she walked across campus, winter wind cutting through her jacket, fragments of memory began assembling into an uncomfortable picture. Vincent had asked detailed questions about her studies during their garden conversations. He had seemed particularly interested when she mentioned struggling to balance work and school. 3 weeks ago, right before Christmas, he had visited the apartment to check on the courtyard winterization, and she had mentioned her tuition deadline approaching with growing anxiety. Confronting the truth. Sophie's hands shook as she sat in the university library, searching online for the Harrison Educational Foundation. The website was professional but vague, listing educational support as its mission without naming specific benefactors or board members. However, a deeper search through public tax records, the kind Sophie had learned to navigate during her architectural research, revealed the foundation's board of directors. Vincent Hayes was listed as founder and primary donor, with an initial endowment of $500,000 established just 6 weeks earlier. The realization hit her like cold water, stealing her breath. Vincent had paid her tuition. Without asking. Without telling her. He had inserted himself into her life in the most invasive way possible, however well-intentioned his motivations might have been. Sophie sat frozen in the library, other students moving around her like currents around a stone. She felt a confusing rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her careful composure. Gratitude warred with anger. Relief collided with humiliation. She thought about every conversation they had shared over the past months, every coffee in the courtyard, every casual dinner, every kiss on Christmas Eve that had felt like the beginning of something real and precious. Had he been evaluating her worthiness for charity the entire time? Had their friendship been genuine or simply his way of observing his investment? Was his affection real, or just the satisfaction of a wealthy man playing savior? Sophie gathered her things with mechanical precision, her mind racing. She thought about her parents, who had worked hard their entire lives and taught her that dignity came from standing on your own feet. She thought about her grandmother's words about self-reliance and the importance of earning what you received. She felt the weight of $8,000 pressing down on her like a debt that could never be repaid, because how do you repay someone who has that much power over your life? The weight. She waited until evening, watching from her apartment window until she saw Vincent's car pull into his reserved parking space. He visited the building 3 times weekly now, always finding reasons that required his personal attention. Sophie had treasured those visits over the past months, had felt something growing between them that seemed precious and genuine and worth protecting. Now she wondered if she had been naive, a foolish girl taken in by an older man's charm and resources. Sophie met Vincent at the courtyard gate before he could knock. She had been waiting by the door, her emotions carefully controlled behind a mask of composure. Her face must have revealed something of her emotional state because his welcoming smile faded immediately, replaced by concern. "Sophie? What's wrong?" "The Harrison Educational Foundation," she said, her voice tight despite her efforts to stay calm. "That's you, isn't it?" Vincent's expression confirmed everything before he spoke. His eyes widened slightly, and she saw the recognition that his secret had been discovered. "Yes," he said simply, not attempting to deny it. "You paid my tuition. $8,000. Without asking me. Without even telling me." Sophie's voice cracked despite her efforts to maintain control, years of carefully guarded emotion threatening to spill over. "Why would you do that, Vincent? Why would you make that decision for me?" Vincent stepped into the courtyard, closing the gate behind him with deliberate care. The evening air was bitter cold, carrying the scent of winter and the roses Sophie had carefully pruned months ago, now dormant beneath frost. "Because you needed help, and I could provide it. Because watching you work 3 jobs while maintaining perfect grades seemed unnecessarily difficult when I had the means to ease that burden." "That wasn't your decision to make," Sophie said, tears burning her eyes despite her determination not to cry. "Do you understand what you've done? You've made me feel like a charity case. Like someone who can't handle her own life. Like someone you needed to rescue because I was too weak or incompetent to save myself. The truth emerges. That's not how I see you at all." Vincent's voice was earnest, almost pleading, his usual calm cracking. "Sophie, you're the most capable person I know. You're brilliant and hardworking and determined. But everyone needs help sometimes. There's no shame in accepting support when it's offered." "There is when it comes with strings attached," Sophie countered, her voice rising. "When it comes from someone who has all the power in this relationship. You're my landlord, Vincent. You're wealthy beyond anything I can imagine. You could buy this entire building without noticing the expense. And now you're my secret benefactor? How am I supposed to see our friendship as equal when you're literally paying for my education?" "What strings?" Vincent asked, his own frustration beginning to show. "I asked for nothing in return. I expected nothing. I simply wanted to help someone I care about achieve her dreams. But don't you see?" Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to contain emotions that felt too big for her body. "That's exactly the problem. You get to be the generous benefactor, the knight in shining armor who saves the poor struggling student. And what do I get to be? The grateful recipient who owes you everything? How can I trust my own feelings now? How do I know I'm not just grateful? How do I know this whole relationship hasn't been built on an unequal foundation from the very beginning? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his breath visible in the cold air. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability Sophie had never heard before, a rawness that cut through her anger. "You're right. I handled this badly. I should have talked to you first, should have respected your autonomy and your right to make your own choices. But I need you to understand something, Sophie. These past months have been the happiest I can remember. Not because I helped you financially, but because knowing you has reminded me what matters in life." He moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance, respecting her space even as he tried to bridge the emotional gap between them. "I've spent 20 years building wealth and reputation. I've dated women who wanted my money or my status or the doors I could open for them. I've attended countless social events where every conversation felt like a transaction, where people saw Dr. Vincent Hayes the successful cardiologist rather than just Vincent the person. And then you moved into my building with your boxes and your herb garden and your dreams of making the world better, and suddenly I remembered what genuine connection feels like. The turning point. I didn't pay your tuition to create obligation," Vincent continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I did it because the thought of you struggling unnecessarily, possibly having to drop out of school and abandon your dreams, was unbearable to me. I did it because I care about you, Sophie. More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. Maybe more than I've ever cared about anyone." Sophie wrapped her arms tighter around herself, fighting the urge to soften, to let his words dissolve her anger. "But don't you see the problem? How can I trust my own feelings now? How do I know what's real between us and what's just gratitude or obligation? How do I separate my feelings for you from the fact that you literally changed the course of my life without my knowledge or consent?" Vincent nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're asking the right questions. And I think I know how to answer them." He pulled out his phone, made a call that lasted less than 30 seconds, and spoke with quiet authority. Then he looked at Sophie with absolute seriousness, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen. "I just instructed my financial manager to set up a formal loan for you. $8,000 at 0 interest, payable over 5 years after graduation. The money that was given as a gift will be treated as a loan that you'll repay on your own terms, with complete documentation and legal formality." Sophie stared at him, momentarily speechless. "What? Vincent, no. I can't afford loan payments on top of everything else. That's not solving the problem, that's just—" "The payments will be less than $150 a month," Vincent interrupted gently, his voice steady. "Completely manageable on an entry-level architect's salary. Your research shows that starting salaries in your field average around $50,000 annually. This payment structure is designed to be reasonable and sustainable. This way, you're not accepting charity. You're accepting a reasonable loan with favorable terms from a legitimate foundation. Your pride stays intact, your autonomy is restored, and you stay in school to complete the work that matters to you." The shocking response. "But why would you do that?" Sophie whispered, her anger beginning to crack, revealing the hurt and confusion beneath. "Why change the terms now? If you thought giving me the money was right, why backtrack?" Vincent stepped closer, close enough that Sophie could see the sincerity in his dark eyes, the vulnerability that he rarely showed anyone. "Because you're absolutely right. Our relationship needs to be equal. I don't want you to feel obligated or inferior or like you owe me anything beyond what any borrower owes a lender. I want you to choose to spend time with me because you want to, not because you feel you owe me gratitude or because you're afraid of what might happen if you reject me." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. His skin was warm against her cold fingers. "I'm falling in love with you, Sophie. I have been since the day you moved in with your boxes and your herb garden and your determination to make the world better through your work. But I need you to believe that my feelings are real, not some wealthy man's savior complex or ego trip. I need you to trust that what I feel for you has nothing to do with power or control or the satisfaction of rescuing someone. Sophie felt tears spilling over, hot against her cold cheeks. The anger that had burned so hot began transforming into something more complex, a mixture of relief and residual hurt and cautious hope. She thought about the man she had come to know over these months. Vincent, who remembered how she took her coffee and brought her favorite pastries from the bakery. Who asked thoughtful questions about her design projects and genuinely listened to her answers. Who had fixed her apartment's heating system at 2 in the morning without complaint or expectation of praise. Who had never once made her feel less than despite the vast difference in their circumstances. A new understanding. I was so angry, she said softly, her voice breaking. Because I was terrified. Terrified that what we have isn't real. Terrified that I'm just another project for you, another problem to solve with your checkbook. Terrified that you see me as someone who needs saving rather than someone who is capable and strong. You're not a project, Vincent said firmly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. You're the person who makes me want to be better. Who reminds me that wealth means nothing without purpose and connection. Who taught me that a garden and a conversation can be worth more than any expensive restaurant or exclusive event. You're the person who sees me, Vincent, not Dr. Hayes the cardiologist or Vincent Hayes the millionaire. Sophie looked up at him, seeing past the successful doctor and the wealthy property owner to the lonely man who had found something precious in their unlikely friendship. She saw the fear in his eyes too, the vulnerability of someone who had opened himself to rejection. I need time, she said honestly, her voice steadier now. I need to process this and figure out what I feel without the confusion of gratitude mixed in. I need to understand my own heart. Take all the time you need, Vincent replied without hesitation. I'll sign the loan paperwork tomorrow and step back. If you decide you want me in your life as more than your landlord, I'll be here. If you decide this is too complicated, that the power imbalance is too great to overcome, I'll respect that too. I'll even help you find a different apartment if being here is uncomfortable. The choice. But even as he spoke, offering her freedom and space, Sophie knew her decision. She had known at the moment he offered to restructure the payment as a loan, the moment she saw genuine remorse and understanding in his eyes. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, feeling him tense in surprise before returning the embrace with careful intensity. I don't need time to know I care about you, she whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath her cheek. But I do need us to build this relationship the right way. As equals. With complete honesty and no more secrets, no matter how well-intentioned. Vincent held her carefully, as if she were something precious and fragile that might break if held too tightly. Equals, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. With honesty. Complete transparency. Starting right now, no more decisions that affect your life without consulting you first. Sophie pulled back slightly to look up at him, seeing her own emotions reflected in his face. For what it's worth, I'm falling in love with you too. Even though you're terrible at respecting boundaries and have a savior complex that needs serious work. Vincent laughed, the sound genuine and full of relief, the tension breaking like ice in spring. I can work on that. Will you help me? Will you call me out when I overstep? Always, Sophie promised. But the next time you want to change my life or make a major decision that affects me, you ask first. You treat me like a partner, not a project. Deal? Deal, Vincent agreed. He leaned down and she rose on her toes, meeting in the middle in a kiss that felt different from their Christmas Eve embrace. That kiss had been sweet and tentative, full of unspoken things. This kiss was a promise, a commitment to build something honest together. It tasted of salt from Sophie's tears and winter cold and the possibility of something real. New beginnings. They stood together in the courtyard beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the roses Sophie had nurtured back to life, now sleeping beneath frost but ready to bloom again when spring returned. something fundamental had shifted between them. The foundation had been shaken, tested, and forced to prove its strength. "I'm going to pay back every cent," Sophie said when they finally separated, her voice determined. "With interest, even if you say it's 0%. I'll add interest because that's what fair loans include." "Absolutely not," Vincent protested. "The terms are already set." "Then I'm adding it anyway," Sophie said stubbornly. "You don't get to make all the decisions anymore, remember? This is me making a choice about how I handle my obligations." Vincent looked at her, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior, and felt his love deepen. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Definitely," Sophie confirmed with a small smile. "But you already knew that." As they walked toward her apartment, Vincent's arm around her shoulders and Sophie's head resting against him, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The shocking revelation had not destroyed them. Instead, it had forced them to build something honest, something equal. A love based not on rescue or obligation, but on genuine connection between two people brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. Two people willing to work through difficult truths rather than hide behind comfortable lies. The lights in Sophie's apartment windows glowed warm against the winter darkness. Inside, they would make tea and talk late into the night, establishing boundaries and expectations, building the framework for a relationship based on mutual respect. Outside, the city continued its rhythms, indifferent to small human dramas. But in that courtyard, beneath bare branches that would leaf again in spring, something real and lasting had taken root. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but worth fighting for. Love, surprising and transformative, had found them both when neither was looking. And now, tested by truth and strengthened by vulnerability, it had a chance to grow into something neither had imagined possible. The end.